Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and this is because everyone's perception of art is different. Through added context and details, the meaning of art can change. For example, let's take a look at the works of Italian painter Giorgio Morandi. Morandi specialized in still lifes. He painted in his simple studio, always in front of the same neutral background, and he painted his collection of pots, jugs, jars, and vases over and over and over. Yet each of his paintings is unique. By altering the arrangement, the background, the level of detail, the brushstroke, the lighting, and the coloring of each painting, he was able to evoke completely different emotions with each one. Although the setting and the objects are the same, his alterations to each still life reflect the mood, context, aura, and environment of the objects while he painted them. While, objectively, the vase remains unchanged from the time of the first painting to the second, the world around it changes. So, while someone might view the vase as being exactly the same, by filtering what he saw through his brain's perception, Morandi was able to create a representation of the vase that holds more truth in what the vase and the room actually were than if he had simply depicted what was objectively there. Perhaps when Morandi painted 4 vases of cheery yellows and reds in front of a butter yellow background, the sun was shining through the windows of his studio, it was summer, and he was feeling very happy. Maybe when he sketched those same vases with a pencil and dark gray, harsh lines, looming shadows on the wall behind, and negative space where the jars are, the seasons had turned to winter, and Morandi was feeling pensive and dramatic. Being in the room when those 2 paintings were made would not be the same experience. Things would not look the same or feel the same, they would not evoke the same emotions in an observer. And so, while the vase is identical in both scenes, truth about the reality of the moment is added when the scene is filtered through Morandi's brain, and his perception of the moment is what is put onto canvas. Here is a prime example of Morandi seeing more and how that creates more truth. Inspired by Morandi, photographer Joel Merowitz took it one step further when he photographed the same objects that Morandi painted, in the same studio in front of the same background. Now, the environment of the room and the moment has changed, and it is Merowitz's turn to express the new truth through his photographs. Additionally, there is now context for these vases and jars that alters what they are. They might objectively be dusty, old, banged-up kitchenware, but they represent the revolutionary artist who painted them originally, and now they can tell that story in Merowitz's art as well. Somehow, after multiple reiterations and filtering through the human mind, the result is the most true and most profound iteration of the object.
Another aspect of seeing and knowing is looking at how background information and context affects the conclusions drawn. To do this, we will use Philip Guston's painting Gladiator, whose main theme is violence. This is seen through how the focuses of the painting seem to be fighting, as well as the title Gladiator, which has a violent context. This intense theme is in contrast to the cubist and more abstract form of painting that was used. This contrast is further emphasized by the contrast between the theme and the absurd figures that are painted. The figures are depicted with heads made of innocuous objects, such as a saucepan, paper boat, or a traffic cone. This absurd context leads to the otherwise intense scene to be considered with a degree of humor. But when considering the context of the time in which Guston painting the scene as just before the USA's involvement in World War II, despite not being involved, there was a clear built-in tension, even in a non-participant, and this gives the ability to see the painting as a metaphor for the times, and indicative of Guston's view on the situation as absurd. The absurd heads of the gladiators now serve to dehumanize them and compare them to the dog, implying the inhuman nature of fighting. When considering the context of an impending war such as World War I only 20 years ago, this painting can be construed to have anti-war sentiments, such as
These themes of violence are echoed in the video game Kane and Lynch 2 Dog Days. Seeing and playing Dog Days is an objectively terrible experience. Half the guns are deafening, the camera shakes and stutters constantly, and the plot is mostly there to excuse the grisly scenes of violence the game seems intent on showing you, whether you want to or not. It's an ugly game at its core. As art director Rasmus Poulsen notes in a 2017 interview, however, this ugliness was exactly the intent. The setting of Shanghai represents a city in flux. The breakneck action of the game is, in some ways, a reflection of the painfully rapid changes in the real city itself and, more broadly, post recession society. The broader goal, as Poulsen notes, was the anti game, something so defined to the standards of the gaming era it was set in that it almost became like an art form. It is artistic poison, but is poison with a purpose. There is clearly a difference between seeing the horrific, violent game and knowing, deep down, that it's only so horrific and violent because it was made that way.
In conclusion, the difference between seeing and knowing lies in the details and context of each individual art piece, as well as each individual's perception and interpretation of that art piece.